First Hot Takes episode in the new place. I'm KMBest. Let's take a look at the hottest takes in Marvel Snap. You don't have to play a top meta deck featured in KM's best infinite decks to climb in Marvel Snap to climb in Snap. I almost feel like this is phrased as a dunk, but it is something that I agree with basically intrinsically. There are many different ways to succeed in Marvel Snap. My goal when I make videos is to give you the most efficient ways to succeed, the best optimized meta decks, but I never want to give people the impression that these are the only ways you can win. One of the major functions of a series like mine is that it also provides people who want to cook, who want to figure out what they need to beat, an example of what the metagame they're trying to beat is. One of the most important things to understand about being a rogue or off-meta deck builder in any card game is that you absolutely need to understand what you're trying to beat and why it's good. And not just why it's good in the sense that, like, Thanos plays a bunch of good cards and does a bunch of points. Why it's good in the context of the metagame and why other meta decks have trouble beating it. Because that is typically the thing you are targeting when you're making a deck that is off meta. So, if anyone got the impression that my videos were telling you the only way to win is to watch my videos, I apologize. That is not what I have tried to do. What I am trying to do is give you the best tools to succeed, not tell you what the only tools for the job are. When I put a deck on there, it's because I believe it is the best version of the deck. It is the best implementation of the deck that exists in the metagame space that it exists in. It is not because I think that is the only playable thing you can do. Thanos wasn't a problem before Goliath and Strange Supreme released. Look at those cards, not Thanos, not Mockingbird, etc. I think this is a roughly true statement, but the implication it's trying to draw might not necessarily be true. And what I mean by that is Thanos mostly wasn't a problem before Strange Supreme and Goliath released. And a large part of that is what Thanos really wanted was a way to curve out with a good 2-drop scaler that also allowed it to free roll Wiccan. Both the ongoing and the tech-based Thanos are doing this. But I don't think that means you have to look at those cards specifically if you're trying to nerf this stuff, because it's also worth pointing out that about 3 weeks before Goliath came out, Thanos got a buff to 12 power, Space Stone got a buff to 2 power. That also was majorly impactful. Similarly, when doing live balance, I don't think the right way to do things is to look at what caused the thing to be broken and then just get rid of that. I think the way to do things is to adjust things to exist in the context that they now exist in without being oppressive. I don't think you can just go delete Goliath and Strange Supreme and call it a day with Thanos. That seems really unfortunate for anyone that bought Goliath or Strange Supreme. What you want to do is adjust Thanos downward to a point where it can exist in this space. What happened with Thanos is it got a buff, 2 buffs really, right before getting multiple cards that work really well in the deck. That is typically a recipe for a deck like Thanos becoming overtuned, and that is pretty much what happened. However, that doesn't mean that those cards are the problem. If I were to nerf Thanos, and spoiler alert for a future video, I might do a wish casting patch video at some point this week. Let me know if you'd be interested in that, like what I do to patch this game kind of thing. I've seen other people do that, and I think it would be an interesting little thing to talk about. Let me know in the comments if you're interested. With Thanos, I think the place to start very clearly for me is just send him back to 610. One of the things about the Thanos deck is it really doesn't play a lot of individually large cards outside of Thanos himself at 12. Bringing him down, and since he is a guaranteed card that starts in your hand, this is a nerf that impacts you every single game. I think that that was a much bigger change than people are willing to give it credit for. Yes, Goliath and Strange Supreme matter a ton. They are very good cards. They are very strong in their respective builds of the deck. Obviously, 2-drop scalers extremely strong when they convert your stones into more points. Not going to argue that. But I do think that you can look at maybe just send Thanos back to 10, put the Space Stone back to 1, and it might be okay for these cards to exist all of a sudden. Because what I find fascinating about this is if I understand their development timeline correctly, these cards were locked in 6 months ago, and then a month before they released, Thanos got buffed, and suddenly, whatever testing they did, chuck it out the window. It doesn't really matter anymore because you live in a different world. Bullseye needs to be an on reveal, not an activate. If he was, he'd be less frustrating. I think the thing about Bullseye and this sentence is like, it is true that if he were an on reveal, he'd be a lot worse because a lot of Bullseye's power is wrapped up in being an activate that can sort of happen after turn 6. The thing is, I think he probably should be an activate because what sets activates apart from on reveals is their ability to utilize that timing mechanic, that ability to pick a time even after turn 6, that specific window they have an ability to access. That is what makes a card an activate different from just a delayed on reveal, is the ability to put it in that specific window. So I think that Bullseye is one of the few activates that is really keying on that, and as such is probably one of the better activates in the game from a design perspective, if you ask me. I think that it would be a lot less frustrating for Bullseye to be an on reveal because you'd lose to it a lot less, because it would be a lot worse because it would lose access to that time slot. Card placement and location management matter way more to win than people give credit for. Take, for example, the top 2 Thanos decks. People play the Supreme version because it's easier to just slap Strange on board and let him cook than to actually manage your board with stones. I mean, I agree with that. I think this is sort of fundamentally why Marvel Snap has replayability, is because even if you draw the same cards and your opponent draws the same cards, where you play those cards can drastically change what happens in the game. And I think that's really important. One of the things I don't think people think enough about is board space economy, what it means to invest a 1-2 here, what it means when you play that 1-2 in a spot, and what it implies about how much you're going to have to put in that spot if you want to have a reasonable chance of contesting it. One thing that I remember thinking about when I first started playing Marvel Snap is like, they would play a 1-drop. I would put an Angela in the 1-drop lane. The Angela would be big enough that their 1-drop just didn't even matter. 1 proc of it was basically that equivalent then, because that was back when Angela got +2. And so thinking about the game like that in terms of numbers invalidating other numbers is sort of the baseline understanding of Marvel Snap that I want people to have. And so, yes, I think that this is definitely an underrated thing. The example they chose of the Thanos deck and like when not to play cards and not to just like run straight into Wiccan and clogging your board, that's because Thanos sort of operates at the extremes of a lot of things in Marvel Snap. He pushes the extremes of board space, he pushes the extremes of card draw. It's part of why I like him being a good deck, but it also does mean that he pushes you to compensate for the fact that he pushes to those extremes. So it's a good example, but I think you could get even more basic. Like, you don't even need to look at something like Thanos that pushes the extremes. You just need to look at, like, why a 3-5 is so good. And it's because if your opponent played a 3-4 in that lane, you end up having 1 more point. You would win that lane if the game ended right now. That's effectively, like, a massively winning play. 1 point winning a lane happens all the time in Marvel Snap. It's why people like me are so focused on these good stats decks, because that's how we win games, is by having more points than the opponent. And if our cards are consistently more points than theirs, we have a massive, massive advantage. It's a season pass card. Let's go and make Esme a 2-2. Too many good 3s at the moment. I think Esme, I mean, I said this about Captain Carter, and I think I was probably wrong, but she is quite good. I don't know that I really want to make her any smaller. I think if you make her a 2-drop that makes a 3, I'm okay with it. But if you make her a 2-drop that makes a 2, suddenly you're making her high roll way, way higher. Like, this becomes like a card that if this is a 2-2 that makes like a 2-2, we are in the range of like everyone playing various Gore Iron Man things and she's just better Iron Patriot kind of thing. I think that's entirely possible, and it's not a place I want to be. Like, I think Esme is a cool card, but it's not a card I want to see a ton of, because of the way it sort of creates these gotcha situations on turn 6. To some degree, that can be good, but one of my least favorite things is when there's just, like, 2 cheap gores on the final turn of the game, and you're like, oh, well, I had no way of knowing that would happen, guess I lose. And that kind of stuff is just really awkward and unfortunate. Also, I think another thing that Esme doing this would do, like pushing her down there, would just make more people play Mobius in the same way that like Iron Patriot did. And I think that generally speaking, people don't enjoy Mobius heavy metagames because a lot of off-meta deck building in this game is focused on finding ways to energy cheat that aren't like typically normal ways to energy cheat. I know Binks, for example, despises anytime Mobius is playable. He's already very good. I honestly think that, for the record, if Mobius didn't exist, Mr. Negative is probably the best deck in the game. So I do think he's doing us all kind of a good service here, but he is like a card you don't want to put too much on, because then you just get a sort of boring anodyne metagame that's about who can use Mobius the best, and everyone's playing Mobius, which means everyone is just playing a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, a 5, a 6, and it's kind of not exactly where I would want to go. So you end up, like, we're already almost there, right? We look at top decks, they are Silver Surfer decks, they are ongoing Thanos decks. These are decks that get extra things out of Mobius. Them being good Mobius decks, or having the capacity to be good Mobius decks, it's relevant and it matters. And I think that that is already indicative of a metagame that is like sort of on the edge of being an issue with regards to Mobius. It's okay to have broken decks and a goofy meta, just swap it up with an OTA every week or two. More stuff like the imbalance patch. That went over very well, and we never saw anything like it again. Okay, so there are two things here. First one, no arguments with the first one. It is okay to have broken decks in a goofy meta. OTAs, live balance, that's a huge boon because you can fix any quote-unquote mistakes, and as you iterate on the metagame, as you make it different, as you let players explore different things, you can create different metagame textures. The goal isn't always to have the world's most perfectly balanced metagame. The goal is to have a novel and new experience, and that can happen in Marvel Snap thanks to the live balance stuff. 100% with you. The second part of this, though, I think is pretty spurious, because you assume that those went over well, and then they never did them again. And I strongly suspect that that means that they didn't go over well. One of the things that really sticks with me about hot locations is I hate them. I never play on them, but they keep doing them. Why do they keep doing them? Because I think if they actually were as hated as people like me and franchise players think they are, if they actually drove metrics down, well, then they'd stop doing them. Like, I don't think they're in the business of making decisions that explicitly lose them money. I think if hot locations were showing a decrease in the fact that people were playing less, I think if there was any evidence of people playing less, they probably would have stopped doing this sometime over the 2.5 to 3 years this game has been available. People have complained about it the entire time. They haven't ever stopped, which means clearly they have data that suggests if it's not actively good for the game, if players aren't actively engaging more, it's probably or almost certainly not a negative. Meanwhile, you have the imbalance patches. They tried those twice, and then they stopped doing them. Again, Occam's Razor, players like you liked them, but the wider player base probably found them confusing and weird and played less. Like, it's just actually that straightforward. I am gonna assume that stuff like this, where it's literally just flipping a switch, they would do them if they were actually good for the game, in terms of the numbers that they look at, whatever key performance indicators, whatever metrics they have. They would do them because otherwise they're very, very stupid. So unless you think they are so dumb as to leave money on the table, I think we can only conclude from their actions. And granted, no, companies aren't perfect. There's things that get in the way of making good changes. I totally understand that. But I don't understand how we can look at this team and say, I think you're an idiot who leaves money on the table every day because the game isn't exactly the thing I want it to be. Because I think if there was any evidence, if that key performance indicators went up during this those like not hot locations, the imbalance patch periods, they would be doing more of them. If they were such an awesome, amazing thing for the larger player base and people played more and engaged more, there'd be some evidence of that, and they'd probably be doing more of them. And their absence of more of these while hot locations continue strongly suggests to me that these are more confusing and worse than hot locations. Snap players are never satisfied. They constantly want strong new seasonal cards to release, and when they do release, they cry for nerfs. Then, when a semi-balanced card drops, like Kahori, people complain that it's too weak. Pick a struggle, guys. I mean, yeah, this is basically true. There is really no argument I have against this. I basically believe this. There is not a way to satisfy a community made up of so many people. And there are definitely people who are bad actors. Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like like, a lot of people like to say, like, oh, well, yeah, it's a monolith, right? It's a monolith. You're looking at people as a monolith. Of course, there are going to be different people who want different things from Snap. That's definitely true. I've noticed people making both arguments who are like, this card is busted. Oh my God, incredible. Go buy it right now. And then they're like, wait a minute. How could they do this? What a huge mistake. Second dinner. How dare you? Within like the span of 2 days. And I understand that. I get it. It's a normal thing that happens. But I really, really do think that like the dunking on second dinner when they release a card that is like balanced and playable, but not like a meta staple like Sam Wilson, that's crazy. Because that is like them perfectly calibrating the playability of a card. Like Kahori is a perfectly playable card. Is it going in every deck? No, it goes in some pretty specific stuff. But I know people in very high infinite who are playing Kahori, and they're not mad at it. And I think that that kind of stuff is like, that's good. It's good that a card like that exists. They perfectly calibrated the power of the meta. They nailed it. It exists like as a pretty good, but not overpoweringly elite card. And then everyone gets mad because it's not overpoweringly elite. And I think that that is one of the things that bothers me the most. Like, not like flipping on these cards, but getting mad when a card is only pretty good or like good in an archetype. The one that drove me the most nuts about this was Goliath, who is insane. Goliath is an amazing, staple, incredible card. And people were like, oh, he's boring and bad. Because he wasn't like immediately breaking the metagame. Even though he was, they just weren't paying attention. Like, I kind of think there's a world in which, like, I don't even know that a card's actual power matters to the perception that people have of it. You remember when Agamotto and Isan came out, and people were like, oh my God, they're broken. And Agamotto's pretty good. You can still play him. Isan is terrible. Like, I honestly just think that, like, a card's actual power level is totally irrelevant to whether or not people think it's a good card release the week of. And it's entirely just down to, this is cool, this is fun. And then they have their fun, and then they realize that it's not that good, and then they turn around and get mad. Snap matchmaking feels scripted. Streaks of perfect games, then sudden doom. Bad draws, killer locations, hard counters. Feels like two different games. We need devs to explain how matchmaking really works and how many bots we face pre-infinite. Something's off. So, first things first, they have explained how matchmaking works. There is an internal MMR, and that internal MMR is similar to, but not exactly the same as your snap points once you enter infinite. Within a band of 30 ranks, so if you're rank 60, you can play up to rank 90 or down to rank 30. Within that band, you are matched with people who have similar MMR to you. There is also an impact of collection level before infinite. If you have a very high collection level, you will often not be matched with people who have a very low collection level. Post-infinite, those bands are obviously off. Like, you are matched with everyone in infinite regardless of collection level as far as I'm aware. And it's generally something within a MMR range of several standard deviations between you and the person that you're playing. As far as bots, my understanding is that the way that they deploy bots is in order to protect players from the players who they think are very far out of their MMR range. This is why people who have very high internal MMR season over season, finishing in the top 50, etc., are going to get more bots than other people. Because there just are not other people in their MMR range for the game to match them up with. That is the fundamental thing going on. There simply are not, like, below infinite, if you were someone who was, like, top 50, there's not a lot of people they feel comfortable putting you up against. That MMR matchmaking stuff. And you also probably have a really high collection level, who knows, maybe. there's, again, not a lot of people that they feel comfortable putting you up against, so you end up getting a bot. I don't know about the rest of bot stuff. Like, I can only speak to my experience and the experience of my cohort at the top end of Infinite and how many bots we get. I can't speak to what it's like to be someone who enters Infinite at like 6,700 SP and what the bot experience is like there. But the reason people at the top get more bots is simply because they are at the top. And I think this is also worth noting, as far as I'm aware, MMR does not gain from bots. It can only lose. So when you get to reset down to, when you get reset, your internal MMR, as far as we're aware, this comes from like a couple of things from data miners. No matter how high up you were, you get reset to 8541 SP or so. Bots don't count. They don't give you any MMR, but you do lose MMR if you lose to a bot because they suck. The other thing that happens though is as you climb up to Infinite, that is what's going to determine your starting SP. Basically, everyone who started at like, everyone who finished the season at like 9,000 or whatever gets reset to 8541, plays against each other on the way up to Infinite. If you do well, you start above 8541. If you do poorly, you start below 8541. The higher of an outlier you are, the more bots you end up seeing. That's basically the way that it works. Now, as far as Marvel Snap matchmaking feeling unpleasant, this is the number one thing that gets people when it comes to evaluating what randomness actually is. Human brains are bad at noticing randomness. And I don't mean like, oh, we're bad at it, like, haha, I trip and fall. I mean, we're literally designed to do the opposite. We evolved to notice patterns. Oh, Borg over there ate those berries and died. I shouldn't eat those berries. Oh, Goober over there managed to get this white substance out of a cow that he can drink. I should probably do that. We extrapolate from like one or two instances. We have pattern noticing brains. But that's not how the world actually works. The world actually works much more randomly than that. And you can see this in every single industry that takes advantage of humans' lack of understanding of odds. Fundamentally, we do not have an intuitive grasp on odds, which is why it is so frustrating to watch people use these sort of intuitive things where they're like, this can't be right. That's the part of you that does not understand math, fundamentally. The part of you saying that doesn't understand what math is. There's this thing where people always bring up things like, I can't believe that I queued into a deck playing the card that I'm playing right after I switched to it. And it's like, okay, I can, because that's literally what the word coincidence means. People love saying, like, there can't be coincidences. And it's like, no. There absolutely can. In fact, they'll happen pretty often. One of the key things about math is that if something has a 10% chance of happening and 100,000 people do it, it'll happen 10,000 times. Like, that is something that we're just very intuitively bad at grasping. We don't get that, right? Like, oh, I had a 90-10. How did I lose? It's like, well, you do that enough times, you take enough 90-10s, you're going to lose a bunch of them. That's how it works. Additionally, they have said a million times there is no deck-based matchmaking. I tend to agree, largely because I can't think of an upside for deck-based matchmaking. People like saying, oh, you have deck-based matchmaking to force the win rate closer to 50%. And the more they want to push the win rate closer to 50%, because then you'll have to like buy to get your win rate above 50%. And it's like, hold on. They already have a system that pushes your win rate towards 50%. It's called matchmaking. You're matched against people who are about as good as you. And then you have about a 50% win rate against those people. They already have that. There's no need to like build some arcane and weird deck-based matchmaking system where you're like, this deck has a lot of ongoings in it, let's give them Enchantress. This deck has Mr. Negative in it, let's give them Mobius. Plus, I honestly think if a system like that existed, it would be gameable and people like me would have figured it out. The upcoming Herbie card should be a high Evo style card instead of making a new First Steps version of each F4 member to give those early game cards new life and maybe make them relevant again. On the one hand, I like high Evo. I would love more high Evos. On the other hand, I don't want to, I want to just be able to play high Evo Cyclops because that's Cyclops. You know what I mean? Like, I don't want to have to put high Evo in my deck to put Cyclops in my deck. Sometimes I just want to put Cyclops in my deck. And I think tying these cards to another card sort of necessarily makes them worse. And if you want these cards to be sometimes standalone or whatever, if you want to be able, if you want people want to play the cards that they want to play. And charging them extra for it in the sense of a deck building cost like High Evo or your proposed Herbie, I think is just not something I'd want to do. Like, I want those cards to be good too, but I don't necessarily want to do so at the expense of letting someone who like really loves Sue Storm, I know what you are, actually play her in a deck without having to pay an additional deck building cost. So I think that is probably a cool thing to do personally. What is going on, y'all? As always, end of the video, KMBest here. You might have noticed I'm extremely yellow today. Don't know what's up with that. I'm assuming it's the color grading because it's like blue in the background and it's trying to compensate for something, so I put the white thing up there. Did not work at all. I look like a member of the Simpsons cast. I do apologize for that. As always, though, I've been KMBest, you've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.